Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem for 20 years, untouchable, unbeatable. Then in 72 hours, a single photograph shattered everything he knew about his wife Mayme. Now he's bleeding out with a bullet in his chest. And the woman he loved for 2 decades is standing over him with secrets he never saw coming. What did Bumpy do that made the Queen of Harlem pull the trigger? To understand how it all led here, we go back to where it truly began. The bullet hit me in the chest at exactly 11 minutes past midnight. And in that singular moment, as I felt my knees buckle and the cold Harlem pavement rushing up to meet my face, I had one crystalline thought that cut through the shock and the pain like a shard of broken glass. I was wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong about her. The blood spread across my white shirt in a bloom of deep crimson, the fabric drinking it in like thirsty soil after a long drought. I could hear voices, distant and distorted, as if I were underwater. Whispers was screaming my name. Somewhere in the chaos, a woman was crying, but all I could focus on was the realization that had come too late. The understanding that arrived at the precise moment when understanding no longer mattered. Mayme, my wife, my queen, the woman I thought I knew better than I knew the streets of Harlem. Better than I knew the weight of a pistol in my palm. Better than I knew my own reflection in the mirror each morning. I had been so certain, so absolutely sure that I had mapped every corner of her soul, catalogued every secret, predicted every move she would make. And I had been wrong. The darkness came for me then, not sudden like a curtain dropping, but slow like ink spreading through water. And as it took me under, I thought about how we had arrived at this moment. I thought about the 72 hours that had led to this bullet, this blood, this ending. Or perhaps it was a beginning, in my world. The line between the two had always been painted in shades of gray. 72 hours earlier, the world had been different. Or perhaps it had been exactly the same, and I had simply been too blind to see it. It was a Tuesday morning, and the September sun was pouring through the windows of the blue velvet lounge like liquid gold, catching the dust motes that danced in the air above the empty tables. The club wouldn't open for another 6 hours, but I was already there, sitting in my usual booth in the back, a telephone receiver pressed against my ear and a cup of coffee going cold in front of me. "Tommy," I said, my voice carrying the weight of absolute authority that came from 20 years of ruling Harlem with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because I'm only going to say it once." On the other end of the line, Tommy Benedetto, a mid-level operator in the Genovese family who had been trying to push product through my territory for the last 3 months, cleared his throat nervously. I could picture him in his social club in Little Italy, probably sweating through his expensive suit despite the autumn chill. "Mr. Johnson, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began, but I cut him off with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "No misunderstanding. Tommy, you've been running dope through 145th Street. You've been using the Murphy brothers as your distributors. You've been cutting your product with enough poison to drop an elephant. And you've been doing it all in my backyard without asking permission, without paying tribute, and without showing the slightest bit of respect for the order that keeps this neighborhood from tearing itself apart." There was a pause. I took a sip of the cold coffee, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. "Now," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout ever could. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to shut down your operation. Tonight. You're going to pull your people out of Harlem. And you're going to call Don Genovese and explain to him that you overstepped, that you disrespected a treaty that's kept the peace for a decade, and that Bumpy Johnson had to remind you of your place in the natural order of things. And if I don't," Tommy's voice tried for defiance but landed somewhere closer to desperation, "then by this time tomorrow, The police are going to receive an anonymous tip about a warehouse in Red Hook. They're going to find enough evidence to put you away for 20 years. Names, dates, transaction records, photographs, everything they need to build a case so airtight that your lawyer will advise you to plead guilty before the trial even starts. The silence that followed was beautiful. It was the sound of a man realizing he had been outplayed before he even knew the game had begun. How? He whispered, "Life is like chess." "Tommy," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "Fools play the pieces. Smart men play the people. I've been playing you for 3 months, and you never even noticed." I hung up the phone without waiting for a response. The satisfying click of the receiver settling into its cradle felt like the punctuation mark at the end of a well-constructed sentence. Whispers. Who had been standing near the bar pretending not to listen, walked over and slid into the booth across from me. The big man's face was impassive, but I saw the glint of admiration in his eyes. "You really got all that evidence, boss?" he asked. "Of course not," I said, reaching for the chessboard that sat permanently on my table. I moved a white knight, studying the position. "But he doesn't know that. Fear of what might be is always more powerful than fear of what is. That's the difference between a gangster and a king." Whispers. "A gangster rules through violence. A king rules through the threat of violence, which means he rarely has to use it at all." I gestured to the chessboard. "Most people play chess to win, but the real victory isn't in checkmating your opponent. It's in making them believe they're already beaten before the endgame even arrives. Tommy Benedetto will fold because he thinks I have evidence. Whether I actually have it or not is irrelevant." Whispers nodded slowly, his gravel mixer voice rumbling in his chest. "Boss, there's something else. We got word about that kid from Brooklyn. DeMarco." The name landed in the conversation like a drop of poison in a glass of wine. Danny DeMarco, the self-styled rebel who had been making noise on the fringes of my territory for the last 2 weeks. At first, I had dismissed him as just another young punk trying to build a reputation by taking shots at the establishment. Every few years, someone like him showed up, all swagger and stupidity, thinking they could make a name for themselves by challenging the throne. They all ended the same way, broke, broken, or buried. But something about DeMarco felt different, and that difference was starting to worry me in a way I wasn't quite ready to admit. "What about him?" I asked, my fingers still resting on the chess piece. "He hit one of our collection spots on Lenox Avenue, took the money. But that's not the worst part." Whispers hesitated, which was unusual for him. The man had delivered bad news to me 100 times without flinching. "He left a message, boss, written on the wall in shoe polish." "What did it say?" "It said, 'The king is blind. Watch what you love.'" I felt something cold settle in my stomach, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was the recognition that this game had rules I didn't fully understand yet. "When did this happen?" I asked. 2 hours ago, while you were on the phone with Tommy." I stood up, buttoning my jacket with methodical precision. "Get the car. We're going home." The drive to Lenox Terrace was quiet. I sat in the back of the black Cadillac, watching Harlem slide past the windows. My Harlem. Every block, every corner, every brownstone and bodega was part of a kingdom I had built from nothing. And now some kid from Brooklyn was trying to paint graffiti on my castle walls. But it was the message itself that troubled me. Watch what you love. It wasn't a threat against me. It was a threat against Mayme. The thought of anyone even looking sideways at my wife made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. Mayme was the one pure thing in my life. the one piece of beauty in a world that was mostly ugly. She was untouchable. She had to be. When I walked into the penthouse apartment, the late morning light was streaming through the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Mayme was in the kitchen, wearing a silk robe the color of midnight, her hair wrapped in a matching scarf. She looked up as I entered, and smiled that smile that had knocked me sideways the first time I saw it 20 years ago. "You're home early?" she said, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted one. She always knew. "Had some business to handle," I said, accepting the cup and kissing her forehead. "Everything all right here?" "Everything's fine, Bumpy," she said, her eyes studying my face with that peculiar intensity she possessed. "Why wouldn't it be?" I wanted to tell her about DeMarco, about the message, about the creeping sense of unease that had been building in my chest. But I didn't, because that was the bargain we had made. Unspoken but understood, I kept the darkness of my world away from her light. She got to live in the penthouse, insulated from the blood and the violence and the constant chess game of survival that played out on the streets below, or so I thought. The darkness I had been trying to keep at bay arrived on our doorstep exactly 18 hours later. But it didn't announce itself with gunfire or threats. It arrived in a package. I was out when it came, meeting with the heads of the other families to discuss territorial agreements and profit-sharing arrangements. The kind of boring, bureaucratic work that kept the peace but made me want to claw my eyes out with boredom. Whispers had stayed with Mayme, which was standard protocol whenever I had to leave her alone. When I returned home in the early evening, I found Mayme sitting in her favorite chair by the window. But she wasn't reading. She was staring at a brown paper package on the coffee table as if it were a coiled snake. Whispers stood in the corner, his massive frame tense, his hand hovering near the pistol under his jacket. "What is it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Mayme looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Not fear. Exactly. Something colder. Something calculating. "It was delivered an hour ago," she said quietly. Hand-delivered to the front desk. The doorman said it was a young man in a long coat. He left before anyone could ask questions. I crossed the room and looked at the package. It was addressed to Mrs. Ellsworth Johnson in neat block letters. No return address. No postage. Just that name written in black ink that somehow looked like a threat all by itself. "Did you open it?" I asked. "No," Mayme said. "I was waiting for you." I picked up the package, feeling the weight of it. Not heavy. Maybe a pound. If that. I shook it gently. Nothing rattled. Nothing ticked. I had survived long enough to know how to check for bombs. And this wasn't one. I tore open the paper, my movements precise and controlled, despite the adrenaline that was starting to pump through my veins. Inside was a cardboard box, plain and unmarked. I lifted the lid. A photograph lay on top of tissue paper, the world tilted on its axis. The photograph showed a young woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old, standing on what looked like a college campus. She was beautiful, with Mayme's eyes and my cheekbones and a smile that was entirely her own. She was laughing at something off camera, caught in a moment of pure, unguarded joy. A daughter. Our daughter. Except we didn't have a daughter. Or rather, we had told everyone we didn't have a daughter. 10 years ago. Mayme had gotten pregnant. It was unexpected. Dangerous in our world, and we had made the hardest decision of our lives. We had sent the baby away to be raised by Mayme's sister in Philadelphia. Away from the violence and the danger and the constant threat that came with being Bumpy Johnson's child. We told everyone Mayme had miscarried. We buried that lie so deep that sometimes I almost believed it myself. Only 3 people knew the truth: me, Mayme, and her sister. And now, apparently, Danny DeMarco knew. With trembling hands, I lifted the photograph and found a note underneath, written in the same block letters as the address: 48 hours from now, she'll be an orphan, unless you give me what I want. Instructions to follow. Don't try to find her. Don't try to warn her. Don't do anything except wait. The clock is ticking. King, and you're about to lose everything. I read the note 3 times, each word searing itself into my brain like a brand. Then I looked at Mayme. She was crying, silent tears running down her cheeks. But her face was composed, eerily composed. "How does he know?" I whispered. "I don't know," Mayme said. But there was something in her voice that made me wonder if that was entirely true. "Bumpy, what are we going to do?" "We're going to protect her," I said, reaching for the phone. "I'm going to call Philadelphia right now. I'm going to have her moved to a safe location. Then I'm going to find this DeMarco punk and I'm going to end this. "No," Mayme said, her voice suddenly sharp as a whip crack. I froze, the receiver halfway to my ear. "No," I repeated. She stood up, smoothing her robe with hands that had stopped trembling. When she looked at me, her eyes were clear and hard as diamonds. "If you start making calls, if you start mobilizing your people, he'll know," she said. "He's watching us. Bumpy. He has to be. How else would he know about her? How else would he know to send this here? Now, when you were out, he's been watching our patterns, studying us." I wanted to argue, but she was right. The realization made me feel sick. "So what do you suggest?" I asked. "We wait," Mayme said. "We follow his instructions. We see what he wants. And then—" She paused, and something flickered across her face. Something I couldn't quite read. "Then we do what needs to be done." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I tried to maintain my routine, tried to appear normal while my mind raced through scenarios and contingencies and increasingly desperate plans. Whispers doubled the guards on the building. I had men watching the apartment in Philadelphia. Discreet surveillance that wouldn't raise alarms. But no instructions came. No phone calls. No messages. Just silence, which was somehow worse than any threat. I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room through the night, a loaded pistol on the table beside me, watching the city lights and wondering who was out there watching me back. Mayme had gone to bed, or at least gone to the bedroom. I suspected she wasn't sleeping either. In the early hours of the morning, when the darkness was just starting to leak gray at the edges, I heard her moving around. I stood up, my joints stiff from sitting too long, and walked quietly toward the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see Mayme sitting at her vanity, but she wasn't looking in the mirror. She was speaking to someone. I froze, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. At first, I thought she was on the phone, but as I listened, I realized she was speaking too quietly, too intimately for a phone conversation. The words were in a language I didn't recognize. Something Asian. Maybe. Chinese or Vietnamese or something else entirely. I pushed the door open wider, and the hinges made the smallest sound. Barely a whisper of metal on metal. Mayme stopped talking immediately. She turned toward the door, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something on her face that I had never seen before. Not guilt, not fear. Something closer to resignation. Then it was gone, replaced by a soft smile. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Myself," she said with a small laugh that sounded almost genuine. "Old habit," When I'm stressed, I pray. My mother taught me prayers in Cantonese. Helps me calm down. It was a reasonable explanation. I knew Mayme's mother had been Chinese, that she had died when Mayme was young. I had heard her speak those prayers before, years ago, but something about this moment felt wrong, felt staged. "Come back to bed," she said, standing up and walking toward me. She placed her hand on my chest, right over my heart. "We need our strength. Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together." I nodded, letting her guide me back toward the bed. But as I lay down beside her in the darkness, pretending to sleep while she pretended to sleep beside me, I made a decision. I was going to find out what my wife was hiding. The next morning, I told Mayme I had a meeting downtown that couldn't be postponed. She kissed me goodbye at the door, her face serene, her eyes unreadable. As soon as I was out of the building, I doubled back. I had Whispers park the car 3 blocks away, and we made our way to a vantage point across the street where we could watch the entrance to Lenox Terrace without being seen. "Boss, what are we doing?" Whispers asked, confusion evident in his gravelly voice. "We're watching," I said simply. "And we're waiting." We didn't have to wait long. 30 minutes after I had left, a black sedan pulled up to the entrance of the building. A woman got out. She was Asian, maybe 40 years old, dressed in an elegant black suit that probably cost more than most people in Harlem made in a year. She moved with a grace that reminded me of dancers I had seen. But there was something else in her bearing, something disciplined. Military, maybe. She walked into the building without hesitation, like she had been there before. 10 minutes later, my wife emerged from the same entrance. She was wearing a simple coat and a hat that shadowed her face. She looked around, the gesture casual but thorough, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought she had spotted us. But her gaze slid past our position without pausing. She got into the black sedan with the Asian woman, and the car pulled away from the curb. "Follow them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stay back. Don't let them see us." We tailed them through Harlem, down through Central Park, into Midtown. The sedan eventually pulled up to a nondescript office building on the east side. Mayme and the woman went inside. I waited in the car, every second stretching out like hours. My mind was racing. Who was this woman? Why was Mayme meeting her? And why hadn't she told me? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to shift in my mind, forming patterns I didn't want to see. After 40 minutes, they emerged. The 2 women stood on the sidewalk, talking. From this distance, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could read body language. They weren't strangers. They knew each other well. Then the Asian woman handed Mayme a package. Small, flat, wrapped in brown paper. Mayme took it, slipped it into her coat, and they parted ways. The sedan drove off. Mayme hailed a cab. "Take me back to the apartment," I told Whispers. "Fast. I need to get there before she does." We made it back with 5 minutes to spare. I took the elevator up, unlocked the door as quietly as I could, and let myself into the penthouse. I didn't have time to search the entire apartment, so I focused on the obvious places: her closet, her vanity, the nightstand on her side of the bed, in the back of her closet, hidden under a false bottom in a hat box. I found them. A passport. Not an American passport. The cover was dark blue with gold lettering. I opened it and saw Mayme's photograph, but the name beneath it wasn't Bumpy Johnson or even Mayme Hatcher. It was something else entirely. Something Chinese. And beneath the passport, a pistol, not the little revolver I had given her for protection. This was different. A professional weapon. Clean. Oiled. with a silencer already attached. My hands were shaking as I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I made it to the living room just as I heard the elevator ding in the hallway. I sat down in my chair, picked up the newspaper, and tried to steady my breathing. Mayme came in, all smiles and lightness. "How was your meeting?" she asked. "Productive," I said, not looking up from the paper. "How was your morning?" "Quiet," she said. "Just read a book. Had some tea." She was lying to me. My wife was lying to me. And the worst part was, I had no idea why. That night, I couldn't keep up the pretense any longer. I installed a small camera in the living room, hidden inside the decorative clock on the mantel, the kind of surveillance equipment that my world sometimes required. I told myself I would only check it if I had to. I had to, at 2 in the morning, when I was supposedly asleep in the bedroom. I watched from Whisper's car parked down the street, viewing the feed on a small portable monitor. I watched Mayme walk into the living room, moving silently in the darkness. She went straight to the telephone. She dialed a number from memory. She waited. Then she spoke. Again in that language I couldn't understand, her voice low and urgent. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When she hung up, she stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the receiver. Then she turned her head, slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at the clock on the mantel, looked directly at the camera hidden inside it, and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't the smile I had fallen in love with 20 years ago. It was cold, calculating, and knowing. She knew I was watching. She had known all along. The screen flickered. And in that moment, as I sat frozen in the darkness of Whisper's car, staring at my wife's smile transmitted through a hidden camera, I realized that everything I thought I knew was wrong. The question wasn't whether Mayme was hiding something. The question was, what was she hiding? And how long had she been playing me? The smile on that screen haunted me for the next 6 hours. I sat in Whisper's car until the dawn started to paint the sky in shades of gray and pink. Watching that frozen image of my wife's face, trying to decode the message hidden in that cold, knowing expression. She had wanted me to see it. That was the part that kept circling in my mind like a vulture over a dying animal. She had wanted me to know that she knew. But why by the time the sun was fully up? I had made my decision. If Mayme was playing a game, then I would play along. But I would also play my own game, running parallel to hers, a shadow strategy that she wouldn't see coming until it was too late. Because the one thing 20 years of marriage had taught me was this: my wife was brilliant. But she still thought like someone who believed I would always choose love over survival. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I went home at 7 in the morning, let myself in quietly, and found Mayme in the kitchen, making breakfast as if the previous night had never happened. She looked up when I entered, her face brightening with a smile that would have fooled anyone who didn't know what I knew. "You're up early," she said, pouring me coffee without being asked. The ritual was so familiar it hurt. "Couldn't sleep," I said, accepting the cup. "Too much on my mind." "The DeMarco situation?" she asked, her voice carrying just the right amount of wifely concern. "Among other things," I said, watching her face carefully. Nothing, not a flicker of guilt or tension. She was good. Better than good. She was perfect. We ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that comes from 2 decades of shared mornings. I read the paper. She did the crossword puzzle. To anyone watching, we were exactly what we appeared to be: a married couple, comfortable in their routine, secure in their understanding of each other. But I was watching her the way a chess player watches an opponent who has just made an unexpected move, trying to see 3 steps ahead, trying to understand the strategy. After breakfast, I kissed her goodbye and told her I had business to attend to. She touched my face with her hand, her fingers gentle against my cheek. "Be careful out there," she said softly. "Always am," I replied. The moment I was out of the apartment, I made a phone call I never thought I would make. Vincent Gigante answered on the 3rd ring. The chin, they called him one of the most powerful men in the Genovese family, and someone who had been trying to muscle in on Harlem for the better part of a decade. We had an understanding, Vincent and I, a cold peace built on mutual respect and the knowledge that a war between us would cost more than either side could afford to pay. But desperate times, as they say, make for strange bedfellows. Bumpy. Vincent's voice was smooth as expensive whiskey, carrying just a hint of amusement. "To what do I owe the unexpected pleasure?" "I need information," I said, standing in a phone booth 3 blocks from my apartment, watching the street for any sign of a tail. And I needed to stay between us. There was a pause. I could hear the calculations happening on the other end of the line. "Information about what? About someone in my organization," I said. "Someone I suspect is playing both sides." Another pause. Longer this time. "You want me to help you spy on your own people?" Vincent asked. "Bumpy, that's a dangerous game. If word got out that you were working with me, even for something like this, it could undermine everything you've built." "I know," I said. "Which is why this conversation never happened. I'm not asking for favors, Vincent. I'm offering a trade. Information for information." "What kind of information are you offering? The kind that tells you exactly which of your own people are skimming off the top and planning to make a move against you," I said. I had been holding on to that intelligence for months, saving it for exactly the right moment. This, apparently, was that moment. I could hear Vincent breathing on the other end of the line. "Who do you need watched?" he asked finally. "My wife," I said. And saying the words out loud felt like swallowing broken glass. The silence that followed was profound. In our world, wives were sacred. They were the line between the life and everything else. You didn't involve them, you didn't suspect them, and you certainly didn't ask outsiders to surveil them. "Jesus, Bumpy," Vincent said quietly. "Are you sure about this?" "No," I admitted. "But I need to be." We made the arrangements quickly. Vincent had people, discreet people, who could follow Mayme without being detected. They would report back to him, and he would report back to me. In exchange, I would give him the names and the evidence about his internal problems. It was a devil's bargain, but I was out of options. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known in that moment, was that Mayme had anticipated exactly this move, because while I had been making my call to Vincent Gigante, she had been making a call of her own. The truth about Mayme's past was something I thought I knew. She had told me, years ago, that she had worked for the government during the war, administrative work. She said, filing papers, typing reports, the kind of boring but necessary labor that kept the military machine running. I had believed her because I had no reason not to. But administrative clerks don't speak 3 languages fluently. They don't know how to pick a lock in under 30 seconds. And they don't keep fake passports and silenced pistols hidden in hat boxes. The real Mayme Hatcher had been recruited by the Office of Strategic Services in 1943, when she was barely 20 years old. Her mixed heritage, her language skills, and her ability to blend into multiple communities had made her valuable to an organization that operated in the shadows of the war. She had been sent to Southeast Asia, to China, to places where a young woman with the right face and the right story could gather intelligence that American soldiers never could. And in those dark corners of the world, She had met a young operative named Danny DeMarco. They had been partners. More than partners. They had been the kind of team that survives impossible situations through trust and synchronized instinct. They had saved each other's lives more times than either could count. And when the war ended and the OSS dissolved into whatever came next, they had been offered a choice: come back into the fold for the new organization they were building, or disappear into civilian life. Mayme had chosen to disappear. She had wanted normalcy. She had wanted a life that didn't involve dead drops and coded messages and the constant fear of betrayal. Danny DeMarco had made a different choice. He had stayed in the game, and over the years, that game had twisted him into something dark and desperate. When Mayme had received the package with our daughter's photograph, she had known immediately who had sent it: the handwriting, the method, the whole psychological profile of the threat. It all pointed to someone who knew how she thought, who understood her weaknesses and her fears. It pointed to the one person in the world who knew her secrets. But DeMarco hadn't sent that package as a threat. He had sent it as a signal, a call for help wrapped in the language of menace, because he knew that any other approach would raise too many questions, would expose too much. The real message wasn't, "I'm going to hurt your daughter." The real message was, "They know about your daughter, and they're going to use her to get to you unless you help me." The "they" in question was the organization that had once employed them both. The organization that had supposedly let Mayme go, but had actually been watching her for 20 years, waiting for the moment when they might need to activate her again. And that moment had arrived. The meeting Mayme had attended with the Asian woman hadn't been a betrayal. It had been a briefing. The woman was her old handler, pulling her back into a world she thought she had escaped, using our daughter as leverage to ensure compliance. Mayme's plan was elegant in its complexity. She would pretend to go along with their demands. She would feed them information about my organization, about the power structure of Harlem, about everything they wanted to know. But she would also be feeding them false intelligence, carefully crafted lies mixed with just enough truth to keep them believing. And she would use Danny DeMarco, the one person who owed her a debt that could never be repaid, to help her dismantle the organization from the inside. The only problem with this plan was that it required her to lie to me, to deceive the one person she had sworn never to deceive. Because if I knew the truth, if I understood what she was really doing, I would have tried to stop her. I would have tried to protect her. And in trying to protect her, I would have destroyed everything. So she let me think she was hiding something. She let me catch glimpses of her secret world. She let me install cameras and make desperate phone calls to my enemies, because she knew that a man who thinks he's being betrayed will act in predictable ways. And predictable behavior was exactly what she needed. 3 days after I had made my deal with Vincent Gigante, the trap sprang shut, but not in the way anyone expected. It started with a phone call at 3 in the afternoon. I was at the Blue Velvet, going over the books with my accountant, when Whispers burst through the door, his face pale beneath his dark skin. "Boss," he said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "It's Mayme. Someone took her." The world stopped spinning. The air went out of the room. Everything narrowed down to those 4 words. Someone took her. "What do you mean, someone took her?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, despite the fact that my heart was trying to punch through my ribcage. "She left the apartment this morning to go shopping. Tony was with her, like always. They were on 125th Street when a car pulled up. 3 men got out. They grabbed her, threw her in the car, and drove off. Tony tried to stop them, but..." Whispers swallowed hard. "They shot him. Boss. He's at Harlem Hospital right now. He's alive. But it's bad." I stood up, my chair clattering to the floor behind me. My hand went automatically to the pistol under my jacket, checking that it was there, that it was loaded, that it was ready. Did anyone see the car? Did anyone get a plate number? Better than that, Whispers said. We got a witness who recognized one of the men, said he's seen him around, young guy in a long coat. DeMarco, I whispered. Whispers nodded. Tony said the same thing before he passed out. Said he heard one of the men call out the name Danny. For a long moment, I stood there, feeling the rage build inside me like pressure in a boiler. This punk, this Brooklyn nobody, had threatened my wife. He had sent packages with our daughter's picture. He had left cryptic messages, and now he had crossed the one line that could never be uncrossed. He had put his hands on her. Get everyone, I said. My voice cold as a January wind. I mean everyone. Whispers. Every man we have. Every favor we're owed. Every gun we can put on the street. I want this city turned upside down. I want every rat hole searched. Every hideout raided. Every street corner shaken down. Find them. Find them now. But before Whispers could move, the phone on my desk rang. I picked it up, my hand steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. Bumpy Johnson, I said. Mr. Johnson. The voice on the other end was young, confident, with just a hint of Brooklyn accent. I believe I have something that belongs to you. DeMarco, I said. And I heard Whispers suck in a sharp breath. That's right. Now, before you start making threats, before you start talking about what you're going to do to me, I want you to listen very carefully. Your wife is safe, for now. She's going to stay safe as long as you do exactly what I tell you to do. If you hurt her, I began, but he cut me off. I'm not going to hurt her, Bumpy. Not if you're smart about this. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come meet me, alone. No Whispers, no army, no backup. Just you. You're going to come to the old Riverside warehouse on the west side, Pier 71. You know it. I know it, I said. Good. You've got 1 hour. If you're not here, if you bring anyone with you, if I see so much as a shadow that looks wrong, your wife dies. And then I go to Philadelphia, and your daughter dies too. Do you understand? The mention of our daughter made my blood turn to ice. I understand, I said. One more thing, DeMarco said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. You need to make a choice. Bumpy, you can keep Harlem, or you can get your wife back. But you can't have both. I want you to sign over your territories, your operations, everything. You're going to walk away from the kingdom you built, and you're going to do it to save one woman. The question is, are you really the king everyone thinks you are, or are you just a man who's about to lose everything? The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, my mind racing through options and scenarios. Every instinct I had, every lesson I had learned on the streets, was screaming at me that this was a trap, that walking into that warehouse alone was suicide. But it was Mayme, and there was no choice at all. Boss, Whispers said quietly, you're not actually going to go alone, are you? Yes, I said, setting down the phone. I am. That's exactly what he wants. He's going to be waiting for you with an army. He's going to put a bullet in you the second you walk through that door. Probably, I agreed. But he's also probably bluffing about hurting Mayme. He needs her alive to control me. So I have a window, a small one. But it's there. What are you going to do? I looked at Whispers, this man who had stood beside me through 100 fights, who had never once questioned my orders or my judgment. I'm going to go get my wife, I said. But I need you to do something for me first. 45 minutes later, I pulled up to Pier 71 in my Cadillac, alone as instructed. The warehouse loomed ahead of me, a massive structure of rusted metal and broken windows that had been abandoned for years. It was the perfect place for an ambush, which was exactly why DeMarco had chosen it. I got out of the car slowly, my hands visible, my movements deliberate. I wasn't wearing my jacket, just a white shirt and dark pants. I wanted them to see that I wasn't obviously armed. Though the small pistol tucked into the back of my waistband was a comfort I wasn't willing to give up entirely. The main door of the warehouse was open, a black rectangle of darkness in the gray afternoon light. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing on the concrete. Inside, the warehouse was dim, lit only by the light filtering through the broken windows high above. The space was vast, filled with old crates and rusted machinery. And in the center of it all, sitting in a chair with her hands tied behind her back, was Mayme. She looked up as I entered, and our eyes met across the distance. She didn't look scared. She looked angry. And underneath the anger, I saw something else. Something that looked almost like reassurance. Bumpy. DeMarco's voice echoed from somewhere in the shadows. Right on time. I appreciate punctuality. Let her go, I said, my voice carrying through the empty space. You wanted me. Here I am. Let her go. And we can talk about whatever it is you really want. DeMarco stepped out from behind a stack of crates. He was younger than I had expected, maybe 26 or 27, with dark hair and eyes that held a strange mixture of desperation and determination. He was holding a pistol loosely at his side, but there were at least 4 other men visible in the shadows, all armed. What I want, DeMarco said, walking slowly toward Mayme's chair, is for you to understand something. Bumpy. This was never about Harlem. This was never about your territory or your money or your reputation. He placed his hand on Mayme's shoulder, and I felt every muscle in my body tense. This was always about her, he continued, about making sure she stayed safe, about protecting her from people who wanted to use her, people who wanted to pull her back into a world she left behind. I stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? Tell him, Mayme, DeMarco said gently. Tell him the truth. All of it. Mayme looked at me, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. But she was also smiling. That same cold, knowing smile from the camera feed. I'm sorry. Bumpy, she said softly. I'm sorry I had to lie to you. I'm sorry I had to make you think I was betraying you. But it was the only way. The only way to... what? I asked, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. To save our daughter, she said, to save all of us. And then she did something that made my heart stop. She pulled her hands out from behind her back. The ropes fell away, cut cleanly through. She hadn't been tied up at all. DeMarco wasn't holding her hostage. They were working together. What is this? I whispered. This, said a new voice from the shadows, is a performance, and you played your part perfectly. A man stepped into the light. He was older, maybe 60, wearing an expensive suit that screamed federal government. His face was hard, weathered, the face of someone who had made difficult decisions and lived with the consequences. Mr. Johnson, he said, extending his hand as if we were meeting at a cocktail party. My name is Richard Hayes. I work for an organization that doesn't officially exist, and your wife has been one of our most valuable assets for the past 20 years, even when she thought she had retired. I didn't shake his hand. I was too busy trying to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing. You see, Hayes continued, lowering his hand, We've been tracking a major criminal organization, not street-level operations like yours. No offense, but something much bigger. An international syndicate that's been using American organized crime as a distribution network. And they've been trying to get to Mayme for months, because they know what she knows, what she used to do for us. We needed to flush them out, DeMarco said, taking over the explanation. We needed to make them think Mayme was vulnerable, that she was isolated, that she was desperate enough to be turned. So we created this whole scenario, the threats, the package with your daughter's picture, all of it, to make you react, to make you do exactly what you've been doing. And what have I been doing? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You've been watched, Hayes said. Every move you've made, every call you've placed, every person you've contacted. We've been using you as bait, Mr. Johnson, to draw out the real players. The pieces were starting to fall into place now, forming a picture that made me feel sick. Vincent Gigante, I said slowly. When I called him, when I asked him to watch Mayme, he reported it immediately to his bosses, Hayes confirmed. Who reported it to their bosses, who reported it to the people we've been trying to catch for 5 years. And now they think they have an opening. They think Mayme is compromised, that her marriage is falling apart, that she's vulnerable to recruitment. And they're making their move tonight, Mayme said, standing up from the chair. They're going to try to grab me for real, but instead of getting me, they're going to walk into the largest coordinated law enforcement operation in the history of New York City. I looked at my wife, this woman I thought I knew, and felt like I was seeing her clearly for the first time. You used me, I said. Yes, she admitted, walking toward me. I had to. If you had known the truth, you would have tried to protect me. You would have locked me in the apartment, surrounded me with guards, and they would have known something was wrong. The only way this worked was if your reactions were genuine, if you really believed I was in danger. So all of it, I said, my voice hollow. The package, the threats, DeMarco's attacks on my operations, all of it was theater. Not all of it, DeMarco said. I really did destroy some of your product and rough up your people. We had to make it look real. Sorry about that. By the way, professional necessity. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage at them for manipulating me, for using my love for my wife as a weapon against me. But underneath the anger was something else, a grudging, bitter respect for the elegance of the plan. There's just one problem, I said. If this is all a setup, if you're waiting for these people to make their move, then why am I here? Why bring me into this warehouse for this little reveal? Hayes and Mayme exchanged a glance. Because, Hayes said carefully, we need you to keep playing your part. We need you to leave here looking defeated. We need you to go back to Harlem and start making arrangements to give up your territory. We need everyone to believe that you chose your wife over your kingdom, because that's what will convince them that you're out of the equation, that you're no longer a threat. And when this is all over, I asked, when you've caught your international criminals and saved the world, what happens to me? You go back to your life, Hayes said. We forget we ever met. You keep Harlem. Your wife comes home. Your daughter stays safe in Philadelphia. Everyone gets what they want. It was a reasonable offer, a good offer. Even, but something about it felt wrong. What aren't you telling me? I asked, looking at Mayme. She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, the world exploded. The blast came from the eastern wall of the warehouse, a massive concussive force that turned metal and concrete into deadly shrapnel. I was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard, my ears ringing, my vision blurred with dust and smoke. Through the chaos, I heard screaming, Gunfire. The sound of the warehouse structure groaning as it started to collapse. I pushed myself up, searching desperately through the smoke for Mayme. I saw her 20 feet away. On the ground, blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead. DeMarco was beside her, trying to pull her toward cover. Hayes was down, not moving. And then I saw them. Men in black tactical gear, pouring through the hole in the wall, weapons raised. But they weren't police. They weren't FBI. They were the people Hayes had been trying to catch, and they weren't here to capture anyone. They were here to eliminate witnesses. Bumpy. Mayme's voice cut through the chaos. She had gotten to her feet, DeMarco supporting her. In her hand was the pistol I had found in her closet, the one with the silencer. "We need to move," she shouted. "The whole building is rigged. This was the trap all along." She was right. I could see it now. This wasn't Hayes's operation. He had been played just like I had been played. Someone had fed him false intelligence, had walked him into this warehouse with the promise of a major bust, and now they were going to bury all of us in the rubble. I pulled my own pistol from my waistband and ran toward Mayme. The men in black were firing now, their bullets chewing up the concrete around us. I fired back, not aiming for anything specific, just trying to create enough chaos to cover our movement. We made it to a side door, DeMarco in the lead, Mayme behind him, me bringing up the rear. Another explosion rocked the building, this one closer, and I felt the heat of it wash over my back. We burst out into the fading daylight, into an alley that ran behind the warehouse. A black van was waiting there, engine running. The side door was open. "Get in," DeMarco yelled. Mayme dove in first. I was right behind her. But as I turned to make sure DeMarco was following, I saw one of the tactical team members emerge from the warehouse, his rifle raised. I saw the muzzle flash. I felt the impact, a hammer blow to my chest that drove all the air from my lungs. I fell backward into the van, my vision already darkening at the edges. I could hear Mayme screaming my name. I could feel her hands on my face, on my chest, trying to stop the blood. "Drive," she was yelling at DeMarco. "Drive now." The van lurched into motion, through the haze of pain. I looked up at Mayme's face. She was crying, her tears mixing with the blood and the dust. "Don't you die," she was saying, over and over. "Don't you dare die on me, Bumpy Johnson. You don't get to die. Not yet. Not before I tell you everything. Not before you know the whole truth." I tried to speak, tried to tell her it was okay, that I understood now, that I saw what she had been trying to do, but the words wouldn't come. The darkness was closing in, warm and heavy and irresistible. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me completely was Mayme's voice, fierce and desperate, and filled with a love that had survived 20 years of secrets and lies. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, Bumpy, stay with me. The truth is coming. You just have to stay alive long enough to hear it." I woke up 3 days later in a private room. Mayme's hand gripped mine, her face exhausted but relieved. "Federal body armor," she said quietly. "DeMarco slipped it into your car." "We couldn't tell you." I squeezed her hand. "The daughter. Tell me the truth." Tears filled her eyes. "Sarah isn't ours biologically. She's Danny's sister. My sister. When our parents died, I was recruited by the OSS. Danny was just a baby. I placed him with my aunt, told everyone he was our daughter to protect him. DeMarco wasn't a threat. He was family." "Hayes," I asked. "Dead in the explosion, but we got the rest, including Senator Robert Halloway." 2 weeks later, they brought me the evidence. Photographs, recordings, documents tracing corruption from Harlem to Congress. Senator Holloway had controlled both sides of the law. You could destroy him, DeMarco said. I stared at the files. Revenge would be easy, but it would cost too much. No, I said. We use this to protect Harlem. It's not a weapon. It's a shield. Mayme smiled. You're learning. The transformation took a year. I left the illegal operations behind. Invested in legitimate businesses. Mayme formalized her intelligence network. DeMarco became our shadow protector. 1 year later, I sat in an office overlooking Harlem. Legitimate. Legal. Almost boring. Mayme walked in without knocking, placing a folder on my desk. Next target, she said. City councilman taking bribes to demolish low-income housing. I opened it, already planning my approach. Still not used to you running things, I said. She kissed me. You're the king. I'm the queen. And the queen is the most powerful piece. My eyes found the photograph on my desk. Mayme, me, and Sarah in her FBI Academy uniform. She graduates next month, Mayme said, top of her class. Another generation playing the game, I said. That's how dynasties are built, through vision, not violence. I looked out at Harlem, transformed and still transforming. Real power, I said quietly, is making sure they never know you're playing the game. Mayme smiled that knowing smile. Now you finally understand. The King and Queen of Harlem had evolved, and the city slept peacefully, unaware of the forces protecting it from the shadows.